You can see it all the time in different kinds of ways in which you encounter others. All right, negativity bias is that, is the ability of the brain to hold on to negative stuff better than positive stuff, right? So how many of you remember word for word the crappy text your girlfriend or boyfriend sent you, but would have a hard time remembering the 50 nice things they said, right? I'm really good at that. I don't like reading my student evaluations because in a pool of 250, I will only remember the 3 negative ones and I can repeat them to you word for word, right? So our brains are very good at remembering negative things. Now, why would that influence us when we think about issues of diversity? So it influences us because when we get information about groups, let's say we hear something about Syrian refugees. How much news are we getting about Syrian refugees that's positive? Like none. Like, sometimes you get a story, a human interest story, right, about a really awesome kid who's just delighted that they finally got to get somewhere safe, right? But generally speaking, it's not positive. So if, for instance, you're in a situation where you encounter someone from that group, your brain will associate a whole series of negative things. Because you only got negative things. It turns out our news likes to give you negative stuff, so you're not going to get a lot of positive information. And so when we encounter people from other cultures, we have a tendency to already have a whole bunch of negative info on them, right? And that can be extremely bad when we're trying to figure out how to interact with people from different groups and not have bias. Now, the other thing that happens is we tend to focus on worse off others. So system justification theory is this idea that we want to defend the status quo. We want to think that the world is fair. I mean, even if you guys think you're sort of radical, maybe I have a radical or two in the room, we all tend to want to think it's just things work out the way they should. So we don't really like to imagine that something is happening to another group that we should be doing something about because it isn't right? So we would prefer to say, well, this difficult thing that's happened over there, that's sort of their problem, they didn't handle it right, now I don't need to deal with it. But what happens is that, again, if you're encountering groups, especially students that come from disadvantaged situations, it becomes extremely difficult to really feel compassion for them. Because that starts to make you feel anxious, like what are my obligations, what should I do, how should I help them? And of course, it's not your job to fix it, right? The important thing is that we have this interesting psychological response where we sort of want to make it seem fair so we don't have to have any obligation back, when in fact, nobody's expecting anyone to fix it. But having compassion is a reasonable thing to do if you're encountering somebody who's been struggling. Confirmation bias is just the fact that we like to confirm what we know, right? So let's suppose I meet a white guy. I'm like, hey, you like to grill? He's like, no, I don't. And I'm like, yes, you do. You just don't know it. Your inner grilling guy has not come out yet, right? I'm just going to pick on the white guys because it's easier. So the thing is that we have ideas, right? We have ideas about what that group has as common traits, right? So if I expect that, even if I get information that says, hey, Sophia, no, all white guys don't like to grill. Many white guys like to grill, but not all white guys like to grill. You need to find out when you meet your next white guy and not bring that assumption, right? Okay, the problem is that that's just annoying and inconvenient, so I just assume all white guys like to grill. And so the problem is that if you happen to be the white guy who doesn't like to grill, you start to get pissed, right? Because everyone's expecting you to be good at grilling. You're like, I don't like it, it's hot, it makes me sweaty, I don't want to be anywhere near it. Similarly, right, Penn State, you gotta like football, you don't like football, there has to be something wrong with you, right? So again, all of these things, they seem like nothing because I'm giving you nothing examples, right? But the reality is that those little examples are, we're doing this all the time, right? Okay. Cognitive dissonance just is the basic idea that we don't like to hold conflicting ideas at the same time. So it's similar, right, to the white guy grilling thing. Suppose I meet a guy who really likes to grill but doesn't like football. That can't be right. Do you see what I'm saying? So we don't like it when we get these conflicting pieces of information. So we just sort of smooth over it and ignore it and put the person back in the category the way we like them, right? Suppose it's this weekend, you meet someone from Temple and they're actually nice. You're like, that's not going to happen. I cannot interact with them. Temple, though, is not really a big rival. Let's say it's like Ohio State. It's like, there's no way I'm going to get along with anybody from Ohio State. Not possible. You see what I'm saying? So your brain has these expectations. Suppose you're out downtown, you're talking to someone, you think they're kind of nice, you might like them, and then you find out they're from Ohio State, you're like, oh, I can't, I just blew it, right? So we don't like it when we start to have information that conflicts with our assumptions, right? We don't like it. And so it makes it extremely hard to undo prejudice, right? Because if we have, so all of this, so what does prejudice mean? Does anybody know? It just means judging something before you know, right? It just means I see the white guy, I go, he likes to grill. I don't find out if he likes to grill. I just see him and I prejudge. I put that quality on him before I know anything about it. Now we all have to do that because we can't live in a world where we never practice prejudgment because it would take way too long to talk to someone and say, so what is it about this that you care about? Our brains try to shortcut that. But sometimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong, we really don't like admitting it. So we go back to, he really likes to grill, just doesn't know. All right, so again, just world phenomenon is sort of a bit like the systems justification theory. It's just this idea that people sort of get what they deserve. That's been especially significant, for instance, in conversations about the refugees, because somehow their victims become sort of responsible for what's happened. What that means, and this will be especially important to you in the classroom, is that it can be very difficult to teach students to have compassion for those from other parts of the world that lead more difficult lives, right? You're lucky if you're teaching little kids, right? Because little kids tend to be pretty open-minded, right? A lot more open-minded than, say, people my age, right? But still, they have a tendency to not really want to examine in deep ways the ways in which they have privilege, right? Because in the United States, we all have a certain amount of privilege that's different from some parts of the world, right? And it's not unlikely that you'll have some kids that might come into your classroom that are coming from difficult situations. All right, so the question is, does any of this sound familiar? So I want to go back and I want to check again what I asked you in the beginning about discrimination. So, the first one is, do you think these psychological challenges affect you? we asked how many of you think you've participated in discrimination. That should match up with who says either very or somewhat when we answer this, right? And it's sort of similar. It's interesting that I still have 14% of you thinking that you're not at all affected by these psychological challenges, because that would be super cool, but isn't possible. So the important thing to recognize is that I do this sort of for a living, right? And I have to tell you, I make all of these psychological assumptions all the time, right? All the time. You cannot avoid some of these. You can't change the way your brain works, is what I'm trying to show you, right? So that means that this isn't about beating the prejudice out of you, okay? Because that can't be done. It's about teaching you how it works so that you understand it and you can see when you're doing it and when it's having a negative impact, right? It's definitely not about saying, stop thinking these things, because that's just crazy, okay? Because you can't do that. So I'm not going to tell you when you meet the person from Temple this weekend that you should just go, oh, of course, Temple is just as great as Penn State, because you're not going to do that, right? You're not going to do that. You have affiliations and attachments, and they're real. And that's fine. You can say, hey, all those kids from Temple, they all suck. You can do that. But you should probably not fight with them. You should probably not say something horrible to their face. You should probably not hit them. You should probably not get in a fight with them in a bar and end up in jail, right? Those are the times, right? So you notice that, oh, I have this bizarre habit of the brain that makes a connection between people who go to Penn State and people who go to Temple, and says the people who go to Penn State are better than the people who go to Temple. And I know I do that, and I actually want to pay attention to that process, because it's a flawed process, because there are some jerks that go to Penn State, and there's some really awesome people that go to Temple, but, you know, it's not very convenient for me to think about that. So the point I'm trying to make is that you're not going to stop having prejudice. The reason why the football example is good is because it's totally real. You're going to go to the game and you're like, ah. If you see someone even wearing a Temple shirt, the first thought is going to be like, jerk, right? And this is, again, this isn't about race. This is an easy thing to notice. You have a dislike for someone you've never met because you associate them with a group that you consider inferior to you. It's weird, but you're going to do it. So what I'm trying to teach you to do is to notice how it happens, to be smarter about how it works, right? And to say, okay, maybe no harm, no foul on the Temple thing, as long as I don't get in someone's face. Where are the lines, right? So that's part of what you want to try to do. All right, let's do one more poll here. Because they're like, Dad, I'm sick of the grilling thing. All right, so the thing is that every one of you has been the victim of discrimination. You have to distinguish the difference between being potentially from a group that's privileged and the reality that even if that's true, you're still the victim of